Welcome you all. I call this meeting to order and welcome to meeting number 15 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. The committee is meeting to study quantum computing. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format, pursuant to House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members may participate in person or remotely using Zoom. If you're in the room, I see colleagues here from the Conservative Party, Mr. Moss. You are familiar with the health rules in force, so please behave accordingly. And welcome to all of our witnesses. Thank you for being with us today. We apologize for our slight delay. We were waiting for everybody to connect. Just a brief reminder before we begin. Be sure that your microphone is properly placed, roughly where mine is. And I'd like to introduce you. As an individual, we have Dr. Anne Broadbent, professor and holder of the University Research Chair in Quantum Information and Cryptography at the Department of Mathematics and Statistics, University of Ottawa. Good afternoon, Dr. Broadbent. And we also have Dr. Edward McCauley, President and Vice Chancellor, University of Calgary. Thank you for being with us, Mr. McCauley. From 1QB Information Technologies, Andrew Fersman, co-founder and Chief Executive Officer. Happy to have you with us. We know that last time it didn't work, so we're happy that you're with us today. We will likely be hearing also from Luc Sirois from the Conseil d'Innovation du Québec, and a little later we'll be having D-Wave Systems Inc., Alison Schwartz, Vice President, Global Government Relations and Public Affairs, and finally from Photonic Inc., Dr. Stephanie Simmons, Founder and Chief Quantum Officer. Without any further ado, for roughly 5 to 6 minutes, I'd like to begin with Dr. Broadbent, please. Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. I'm delighted to contribute to your important study on the national quantum industry and the retention of our talent and our competitive advantages. My name is Anne Broadbent. I'm the holder of the University of Ottawa University Research Chair in Quantum Information and Cryptography in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics. I'm proud to say that my academic background is 100% Canadian. My research focuses on designing new security protocols using quantum information to obtain new functionalities. I'm recognized worldwide for my role in inventing blind quantum computing, which is a secure method for quantum internet computing.
20 years ago, Canada was the place to be for all things quantum. We are still leading the world, but many countries are hot on our heels. Gilles Brassard at Université de Montréal is the most prominent Canadian pioneer in quantum information science, and I'm fortunate to be one of his former PhD students. His research in quantum cryptography and teleportation back in the 80s is the foundation of virtually all breakthroughs in the current evolution of quantum. He was recently awarded the Wolf Prize, generally a precursor to a Nobel Prize. In the past 10 years, the quantum landscape has drastically accelerated. This is a huge opportunity for Canada. With the advent of big data, Internet of Things, 5G, machine learning, and e-commerce, digital transformation is affecting just about every sector, and quantum presents several global socioeconomic challenges. Research firm Gartner projects that by 2023, 20% of organizations will have earmarked quantum computing in their budgets, compared with less than 1% in 2018. In 2045, quantum is expected to be a $140 billion industry with almost 210,000 jobs and $42.3 billion in returns. Canada is already contributing to this growth. Our nation has a dynamic quantum ecosystem featuring fast-growing quantum companies and universities and research institutes dedicated to pushing the boundaries of quantum research. With over 50 professors working in the area, the University of Ottawa is internationally renowned for its research on quantum communications, sensing, and cryptography. At the U Ottawa Cybersecurity Hub, we are facilitating the transition to e-commerce that is designed to be safe in the era of quantum computers. In my view, this is where the breadth of the impact of quantum is possibly the largest. It affects every Canadian industry with a cyber presence. U Ottawa is also partnering with several very exciting quantum companies like Xanadu, headquartered in Toronto, which was previously presented to this committee. But as with other technology industries in Canada, companies and talent in quantum are facing difficult choices about staying in Canada or leaving for competing jurisdictions. The US, UK, EU, Netherlands, as well as France, Germany, and China all have aggressive quantum strategies. The Netherlands, for example, have established a national organization, which is a connection point for all things quantum. It even includes a quantum childcare pilot program. There is a global competition worldwide, and we are losing talent to foreign, high-paying companies. We're losing highly skilled talent in universities to more attractive opportunities outside of Canada. Que cela signifie-t-il pour un membre du corps professoral comme...
What does this mean for a professor such as me and for academia in general? As a professor in the Department of Mathematics, my job is to teach students at all levels in science and engineering logical thinking, problem solving, and scientific communication. These are the foundations of their disciplines and their careers.
Science discovery is tomorrow's innovation advantage. Academia has a responsibility as one of the fundamental pieces of the ecosystem, and there's an urgent need for skills and development. There's a need for more professors who foster environments for cutting-edge research, a need across many disciplines like computer science, math, engineering, physics, but also social sciences and law. Post-secondary institutions are spearheading research and innovation initiatives that align with industry-relevant research and the translation of research-derived innovations to products and startups. Entrepreneurs are shaped in our institutions, and as my experience confirms, quantum companies of all shapes and sizes rely on the university's knowledge base and talent. There was an interesting discussion at the last meeting about the need to attract, retain, and train talent. I would like to contribute a diversity lens to this topic. For me, it's a privilege to be a woman in quantum in Canada. I say this because it gives me an almost instant camaraderie with a small group of amazing, distinguished women working in this area. Equity, diversity, and inclusion are recognized as catalysts to innovation, and there's a potential for Canada to benefit from further efforts in this area. In conclusion, I feel strongly that the Government of Canada continue to fund inclusive quantum research and its talent pipeline with the goal of strengthening Canada's position at the global scale. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. In closing, I would like to extend a warm invitation to the members of the committee to visit the University of Ottawa and see firsthand some of the next generation of talent and our research at work. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Broadbent. I'll now turn to Mr. McCauley for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Merci. J'apprécie l'opportunité.
I appreciate the opportunity to be before this parliamentary committee today.
More generally, applications of quantum science are extremely important for Canada's economic prosperity into the near and far future. We have a strong position globally in these areas, but countries around the world are investing significantly in quantum research, and this should be a strong signal for the Government of Canada about both the potential impact on our immediate and future economic growth and prosperity. I have 3 requests for the committee to consider. First, continue to invest in the Quantum Canada strategy currently being implemented by ISED. We need to support talent development, particularly at the graduate student level, and talent attraction. Otherwise, we will weaken our competitive position. Countries around the world are investing billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, in quantum science and initiatives. Historically, Canada has invested, but these investments have been piecemeal and somewhat ad hoc. The Quantum Canada strategy is a vehicle to support a national investment in a more coordinated fashion. My second request is to support initiatives across the country rather than simply all in a particular geographical region. The reasons are simple. For Canada's diverse regions to benefit, industrial sectors need applications, and these are often best developed through industry-university collaborations that are often local in character, reflecting the needs of industry. We need to think about how regions can contribute quantum applications for various industrial sectors, such as energy, agriculture, transportation, and logistics. And as a country where 70% of business is small and medium enterprises or SMEs, local collaborations matter. Universities serve as hubs to build industries in quantum science, providing access to machines and talent. Then universities collaborate with each other across the country to create an ecosystem. My third request is don't boil the ocean. Competition is international. Identify those areas where we have a competitive advantage and build on those. Areas such as quantum information storage and quantum security and information transfer, and of course, quantum computing. The University of Calgary is proud to be a major contributor to the quantum ecosystem. We have tremendous expertise in the area of quantum cybersecurity, building the next generation of the quantum internet using secure information transfer. We have expertise in quantum information storage, and are building a major industry-facing laboratory for prototyping and manufacturing. Finally, we have expertise in quantum computing algorithms and applications. The University of Calgary is creating a major vision for activating Calgary as a quantum city. We have attracted Emphasis as one of the world's largest computer supply companies to establish their national headquarters here in Calgary, bringing 1,000 employees and partnering with the University of Calgary on developing quantum applications in a variety of areas, including health, finance and commerce, energy, agriculture, and transportation and logistics. The University of Calgary is also a major collaborator with other regions where critical mass of researchers exist. And please excuse the pun, but our scholars in quantum research are entangled across the country. And University of Calgary has major collaborations with Université de Sherbrooke and the University of Waterloo, among many. Finally, I must point out a source of pride for our university. This year, University of Calgary has been recognized as being the top 5 for research universities across the country. We have joined the ranks of University of Toronto, McGill, UBC, and Université de Montréal, based on our external research revenue of $504 million. We're the youngest university to achieve this recognition as part of U15. And we're also named as #1 in the country in terms of new startup company creation, surpassing University of Toronto and the University of Waterloo. These are all audited quantitative results based on data, not subjective interpretation. Thank you for your attention. Si vous le désirez, vous pouvez me poser vos questions en français.
Please feel free to ask me your questions in French. It'll be my pleasure to answer. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur
Thank you very much, Mr. McCauley. And now I turn the floor over to Mr. Firstman from 1QB Information Technologies.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to share my experience with you today. My name is Andrew Fersman. I'm the CEO of 1QBit. We're a Canadian company focused on a software-first approach to quantum computing. So while many companies take a qubit-first approach, where they select photonics or ion traps or superconducting technologies, usually matching their founders' expertise, then building the best possible devices, hoping to win the hardware race, 1QBit starts with an industrial need, conceives of new algorithms useful to solving specific industrial problems, and then we select the computing technology that's best suited to compute the answer to those problems, usually based on evidence. We recognize that a computer is only as valuable as the problems that it solves, so we partner with hardware companies to ensure that their devices are designed and optimized to solve specific important problems. By way of background, I've studied economics at the University of Waterloo, political science and philosophy of science at UBC, financial engineering at Stanford and Hong Kong, and I'm now Singularity University faculty in Silicon Valley, where I'm focused on advanced computing. I was previously a co-founder of the NASDAQ-traded company Satellogic, where we put a large number of small satellites in low Earth orbit for Earth observation, a founder of Miner Capital, where we invested in BC deep tech companies, including General Fusion and D-Wave and Kindred. And I'm an advisor in Cambium Capital, focused on advanced compute, investing in companies like IonQ and Seek in the quantum world and Grok in the AI space. I'm an advisor to NATO's €1 billion Deep Tech Investment Fund, and I'm the industry board chair of MyTax, as well as a member of the World Economic Forum's Council on the Future of Computing. So I've studied and invested in many deep technologies. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed some substantial returns, and I'm delighted to share a few ideas with you today. I wanted to start by making 2 statements. One, quantum computing is an important industry for Canada's future. And 2, quantum computing is not yet industrially useful. These aren't incompatible ideas. There's a lot of hype around quantum technologies and quantum computing right now because of the transformative potential for a new form of information processing. Quantum computing really is the first revolution in computing, and its development is happening right now. However, because quantum computing is not yet competitive against traditional computers, it's hard to summon the political will to pragmatically support this infant industry, despite the fact that the infant industry argument is one of the most solid economic cases for government investment. I think it's important to recognize that promoting procurement of current quantum computers is not a very helpful way to grow domestic quantum capabilities. And I'd like to share why to help frame how the government can be more helpful. At Satellogic, we originally envisioned a constellation of hundreds of satellites working together, but at first we were only able to launch a small number of individual satellites. Individual satellites are less useful than an entire constellation, but they're still able to provide value individually, observing Earth, but revisiting every place on Earth less frequently than a full constellation. Quantum computing is a little different, and it's at a bit of an earlier state. We're not building small, useful quantum computers that will one day become large quantum computers. We're still building the theory and the components that will one day become the smallest useful quantum computers. But half a quantum computer is basically just a pile of qubits. It's like a fence that goes halfway around your farm. Half a satellite constellation is roughly half as useful as a full constellation, but half a fence is about as useful as no fence at all. And while every fence is at some point a half fence, it doesn't have real value until it's complete. So the current misconceptions around the state of quantum computing mean that as government look to support the infant quantum computing industry, they are frequently trying to incentivize domestic consumption of current quantum computers. But this is kind of like asking farmers to install new half fences around their fields. Quantum computers are not yet industrially useful, and so they aren't expected to be for a few years. To recognize the current realities and to truly help incubate infant industries, government shouldn't encourage the adoption of half-fence solutions today, but should instead focus on incentivizing the long-term development of full quantum systems in Canada, including talent development, software design, architectures, control, and manufacturing methods. So I think that pushing quantum computers on industrial users today is like pushing half fences on farmers. But if governments really want to support the infant quantum computing industry, government should know that the current goal within our industry is to make quantum computers better than classical computers at any industrially useful task. Until then, consistent and reliable direct investment in technology development, similar to the great work happening in Quebec, building a formal quantum innovation zone around Sherbrooke and in many other regions around the world. It's direct investment like these that will help Canadian technology companies weather the hype cycles and business cycles over the next decade, focusing on building real technology over the long term, not generating absurd short-term marketing hype, and helping Canada incubate this infant quantum industry until quantum computers begin to compete against traditional classical computers by delivering real industrial value. To echo Ray Laflamme from earlier this week, quantum computing is happening now, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. I hope Canada's national quantum strategy can be focused around winning the game, not the match. And I really appreciate your time today, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fersman. We'll now move to Alison Schwartz.
On behalf of D-Wave Systems, Inc., thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee, and I ask that my full written statement be included into the record. As background, D-Wave is the leader in development and delivery of quantum computing systems, software, and services, and is the world's first commercial supplier of quantum computers. With our headquarters in our Quantum Engineering Center of Excellence based near Vancouver, D-Wave is passionate about preserving Canada's global leadership. The quantum computing industry is an important one, and we appreciate the attention from the government and look forward to supporting the work of this committee. D-Wave is a full stack provider, which means our technology, products, and services includes hardware, software, cloud platform, professional services, developer tools, and more. D-Wave is the only company building both annealing quantum computers and gate model quantum computers, so our platform agnostic approach can provide a broad industry perspective. Quantum computing is inherently interwoven across a variety of academic disciplines and touches upon a variety of different technologies. This guides our recommendation of inclusivity of academic disciplines and access, as well as integration with different technologies. We recommend that engagement on quantum be multidisciplinary. The quantum ecosystem requires a workforce with skills encompassing everything from engineering and cryogenics and software to IP and business strategy. What is often forgotten is that to be successful, users must bring existing skills from a variety of sciences, theoretical and applied, to ensure the business value of quantum computing is unlocked. Cloud access to quantum computing technology is another key tool to promote inclusive and diverse use of the technology. A federal quantum user access program via the cloud should be created. The United States is working on a similar user access idea called Quest, aimed at expanding access to quantum hardware and enhancing research through a government-funded program. A similar program should be considered in Canada, but we recommend going one step further and including a national quantum training program. This could serve as a beacon for workforce development by engaging Canadian companies like D-Wave and others to provide skills training on their individual technologies. This program could be open to academia, government, as well as industry to accelerate quantum fluency and could easily be stood up as a pilot in 2022 through existing organizations such as the Digital Supercluster, the Quantum Algorithms Institute, and the Creative Destruction Lab, all of whom have existing relationships with industry, government, end users, and academia. As highlighted in the recent consultation report released by ISED, quantum hybrid technology should be supported, and this sentiment is also echoed in the United Kingdom. There will likely always be a need for classical computation as a part of the solution for many problems, but the most complex part of those problems are often best suited for quantum computers. For example, the quantum hybrid solvers in D-Wave's Leap quantum cloud service combine the best of both classical and quantum computing technologies. Government should think of quantum computing in a holistic manner and note that quantum computing technology will likely be integrated with and work alongside a variety of other technologies. One project to consider is building a domestic high-performance computing center that is integrated with quantum. Lastly, there's a real need to showcase the technology's capabilities for today. D-Wave delivers customer value and practical applications for problems as diverse as logistics, AI, drug discovery, and financial modeling for organizations like Volkswagen, Lockheed Martin, and even Save on Foods for grocery optimization. In September 2020, we released our Advantage Quantum Systems that includes more than 5,000 qubits and an expanded hybrid solver service capable of running problems with up to 1 million variables. The combination of this gives businesses and governments the ability to run in production applications today. Yet, with all of this, the first question we most often hear is, what can you do with the technology today? Different systems have different capabilities. Our annealing quantum computers are best suited for tackling optimization problems, while gate model systems are expected to be able to solve problems in quantum chemistry and materials design. We are but one voice trying to showcase the art of the possible. A dedicated government program, such as a quantum sandbox, that supports rapid near-term application development will accelerate innovation, adoption, and commercialization. Other governments are already focusing on application development. A presidential advisory committee in the United States recommended a quantum sandbox for communications resiliency. The Australian Army is looking at quantum applications for optimizing autonomous vehicle resupply, and the Australian government is looking at quantum to optimize their transportation system. In Japan, an application has been piloted that optimized waste collection while also reducing CO2 emissions by nearly 60%. The Information Technology and Innovation Foundation's report highlighted near-term quantum applications and showcased global use cases across a variety of industries. As heard during the ISED roundtables, there is a need to nurture a quantum ecosystem and scale commercial activities, and a quantum sandbox would directly address that recommendation. In conclusion, there is a need to act swiftly in a multi-pronged fashion. Federal efforts should be inclusive of all technologies, incorporate many academic disciplines, support cloud-based access to the system and online training, and create a quantum sandbox to expedite commercialization. All of these efforts should be in addition to the continued promotion of longer-term quantum computing R&D advancements. I appreciate your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Schwartz. We'll now move to Madam Simmons for 6 minutes.
Merci. Good morning, and thank you for inviting us at Photonic Inc. to contribute. I'm Stephanie Simmons, the founder and chief quantum officer at Photonic. I've been part of computer science and mathematics departments at IQC at Waterloo, material science at Oxford, electrical engineering at UNSW, and I'm here as an associate professor of physics at Simon Fraser University. I am a CFAR fellow, a Canada Research Chair, and a Canada's Top 40 Under 40. To my knowledge, I am the only Canadian to have won Physics World Top 10 Breakthrough of the Year twice, in 2013 and 2015, both for my quantum computing breakthroughs, which were covered in the New York Times, Wired, BBC, CBC, and others. Photonic Inc. is a majority-owned Canadian company founded in 2016 for IP and in operation from 2021. We have attracted significant world-class talent and are now at 60 plus full-time employees based here in Metro Vancouver, as well as in 4 provinces nationally and in multiple countries. We are in stealth mode. We are not disclosing our funding, our roadmap, or our pace of progress. But what we can say is that our core technology is on the spin photon interfaces, which enable true modularity of quantum processors and quantum networks, as well as silicon-grade scaling. The previous quantum sessions of this committee have been fascinating. I agree with much of what's been said, but I hold alternative opinions on many key issues. I agree with the previous panels of experts that predicting the scope of impact for quantum technologies today is very much like predicting the scope of the previous 2 times we have commercialized a branch of physics. One with the semiconductor transistor in 1945, and the second with nuclear fission in 1939. Although the specifics are difficult to predict, I would say that transformative technologies follow quite regular patterns in their adoption. After incubation within academia for decades, there is a shift, a mass proliferation of entrepreneurial activity around many distinct approaches, and then finally a dominant design emerges. This is a key moment, after which there is a substantial talent shortage and a mass consolidation into a handful of winners. We believe that the quantum dominant design is not yet here, but it will become apparent in the next few years. I agree with the previous panels of experts that Canada's goal should be to be the home of one of these winners, and that picking winners before a dominant design emerges does entail some risk. But the risk of wait and see is much greater. Although through the public lens, quantum technologies will be initially seen as a sincere cybersecurity challenge. Essentially, unless we defend our cybersecurity infrastructure properly now, the advent of a quantum computer could be positioned as the information security equivalent of the nuclear bomb. Quantum computers will break the asymmetric or RSA layer of modern encryption. RSA is used everywhere. All civilian passwords, online communications, the SWIFT payment system, critical infrastructure logins, government and military communications and files, and old legacy code that is no longer supported. It all needs to be replaced. The concern is very asymmetric. Everything needs defending, whereas only one RSA-capable quantum computer needs to be built by an adversary to have godlike access into all modern and stored communications. Researchers have been working for decades on a potential solution to this issue to build trust in an alternative post-quantum algorithm. I strongly support intense development in this area in all forms because the cost of failure here is so high. No one knows if these post-quantum codes will hold up against future quantum attack or even classical computing attack. I sincerely hope they do, but there's optimism and no hard proofs. 3 of the top candidate post-quantum algorithms have fallen one at a time over the past years, including one just a few weeks ago. We can hope for the best, but we must plan for alternatives. Canada should adopt many layers of protection here. In addition to RSA, we can layer on all post-quantum encryption contenders that are standardized in software so that adversarial organizations must break all of them to get through. This will buy us time. Critical infrastructure, for that, I suggest we additionally layer in provably secure defenses during this encryption transition for insurance purposes. There are 2 provably secure replacements to RSA, one-time pads and quantum key distribution, or QKD. The physical distribution of one-time pads can be initiated immediately at scale. The second, QKD, requires the targeted development of quantum repeaters, and in the Canadian setting, this means quantum satellites. Fortunately, this quantum infrastructure is exactly what will be needed for the upcoming quantum internet, over which we can deploy blind quantum computing, which has been alluded to earlier this morning, and offers unique applications of its own. Canada has a big choice to make here, and urgently. We need to replace all of RSA and decide how much additional insurance we need around critical infrastructure. That choice is substantial because its outcome also determines if we leave the world in building, deploying, and exporting technology to enable the global quantum internet. I disagree with the previous committee members on a few key items. The first is timescales. The history of nuclear fission, it may be illustrative here. In 1933, the world's leading nuclear physicist, Rutherford, ridiculed the idea of ever getting energy from nuclear transmutations. That was the predominant scientific view at the time. If it wasn't impossible, it was at least 20 to 30 years away. However, it was a mere 7 years between the demonstration of nuclear fission a few years later in 1938 and the first nuclear bomb explosion. This is the power of dominant design and a Manhattan-like mobilization to organize it and bring it into reality. We at Photonic believe that quantum technologies are much closer than they currently appear. And the economic benefits will not be evenly distributed. We are the country of the Avro Arrow, of the CANDU reactor, of Nortel and BlackBerry and Bombardier. We are the home of the first transistor patent, filed first in Canada 20 years before the first Bell Lab demonstrations. And where is that? Much of quantum technologies were invented here in Canada, and these are cautionary tales. We have an opportunity to break through this pattern of inventing but not reaping the rewards. I have 6 specific recommendations. However, I believe my time is up and I'm happy to yield the floor. If you would like it, I could take 2 minutes to summarize these 6 recommendations.
Please go ahead, Madam Simmons.
Thank you so much. The first is talent. I came back to Canada to launch Photonic Inc., specifically in Vancouver, with its high quality of life, because ultimately this competition will be won or lost through the talent we attract and retain. We train lots of talent, but we do not retain it. We need to match global professional quantum salaries, which are roughly 5 to 10x the Canadian national salary average. Salaries will grow further when the dominant design emerges and the talent shortage is at its peak. Ultimately, Canadian firms need substantial revenue, not small-scale grants, to compete on the salary front. Procurement. A quantum SIF stream which accepts applications from all quantum companies, including pre-revenue companies, would be good. However, the major need is for major procurement contracts or DARPA-like moonshot contracts to companies. There is an immediate need for the procurement of today and future processors, for Canada-wide talent development, for all those students to train on, as well as quantum network infrastructure, as I alluded to. 3, the government needs to employ a full-time quantum due diligence team so the government can procure or potentially use these tools. Without procurement contracts, the entire Canadian quantum industry will slip away to other jurisdictions that procure from domestic bidders with these due diligence teams, which are underway in the US, the UK, France, and Germany. There is no team within the Canadian government right now to even initiate a discussion on procurement contracts for the Canadian government. Supply chain investment. Other countries can terminate, obviate, or forcibly consume our efforts by dominating quantum supply chain items. There are several government cross-platform supply chain investments I could recommend to be made so that we retain a hope of future digital sovereignty. Corporate espionage, number 5. We need deep support in CSE and CSIS infrastructure support for all quantum tech companies, including the screening of personnel and cybersecurity infrastructure assistance. Furthermore, we must mandate that all universities publicly disclose all international research contracts around national security items such as this. Substantial funding way beyond Canadian funding standards is easily available, and these research contracts purchase the resulting IP from Canadian universities and specifically insist in that contract upon secrecy as a precondition for funding. Lastly, we need to help firms with the post-quantum encryption transition. And 6, the scale and openness to immigration is a key strength of Canada, but as we have heard many times, it is simply too slow. Canadian fast-track immigration programs in the 1990s is almost single-handedly responsible for the Ottawa telecom boom. We need the same for quantum. I have heard some of the most prominent global quantum researchers, yes, trained in Canada, that they ultimately left because the permanent residency process was too difficult for their families to endure. People want to live here, they want to do quantum here, let's pay them well and welcome them back. Thank you. I am very grateful for the chance to share my views, and I look forward to the discussions to come. If there is interest, I would be happy to extend these conversations privately, and I appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Madam Simmons. A very interesting presentation, and thanks to all of our witnesses. It's been fascinating. I'm sure members will have many good questions for you, and we'll start without further ado with Madam Gray for 6 minutes.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. My first question will be for Alison Schwartz. You referenced a quantum training program in your testimony today. Does this or should this also include proactive security training? So there's people trained to secure encryption and online security for companies and public institutions to protect data.
Thank you so much for the question today. I appreciate it. The problem with quantum computing is a lot of people don't understand how to use the different technologies that are out there, and each individual technology has their own unique areas. So the quantum training program that I was looking at was really on how do I create a quantum algorithm, on a D-Wave system versus an additional system. Obviously, training on security is critically important, and that could be something else that's considered to be factored in. But it was not where I was going with the testimony for D-Wave. Was more about actually building folks that know how to use the different systems that are out there and figuring out what those capabilities are.
Great, thank you very much. My next questions are for Dr. Simons. You had brought up a number of important gaps that the government needs to deal with, and I've got some questions here for you today, and maybe if there's things that you also have to say that don't come out in this testimony, you can also do a written submission as well. But my first question is, do you have any recommendations or thoughts on current privacy laws and whether they're sufficient with the potential growth of quantum computing?
Oh, thank you very much. I really do appreciate the question. I think the major issue here is that the transition to a post-quantum environment is going to be much more palatable if we take our time to do so. I do think that the privacy laws should recognize that there is going to be an asymmetry in access to information with whoever owns these systems. And so there should be some decision put into how these things are wielded and who gets access to them while that transition's underway. My preference would be, of course, that transition happens before an RSA capable computer gets booted up to our knowledge. But of course, we're not going to have knowledge about what's happening in clandestine environments in adversarial countries.
Great, thank you. What legislation or action should the government be taking right now so that our systems are protected from the emerging hacking methods which can take place with quantum computing?
Is that to me as well?
Yeah, I've got a few more questions for you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. So I would recommend that in the next coming weeks, NIST is going to be recommending some post-quantum algorithms. I would recommend that the Canadian government mandate or look into how to encourage businesses in a regulatory sense to invest in this. I don't exactly know how that would look, but it certainly needs to be considered. And internally to the government, it should be considered how to ensure the critical infrastructure has provably secure. So this post-quantum encryption may or may not actually hold up to time. One of the finalists for that NIST competition, which has been underway for years, just fell to a classical computer laptop hack. So it's not clear if these things will stand up. I absolutely hope they do. I think we should layer them all in, and in addition, put some insurance down on QKD or one-time pad infrastructure for the critical infrastructure.
Great, thank you. That actually flows into another question that I had, which was around awareness. So what do you think should be done to increase awareness and ensure that we're ahead of the curve in protecting Canadian security and privacy? And do you believe that not only governments, but as well institutions like banks and schools and hospitals are aware of the emerging security risks from quantum computing?
So what I would suggest is that at the moment you'll hear different, people don't feel the urgency, and they need to. And what I would say is 10 years ago, people were suggesting that quantum computers, full-scale quantum computers, were 30 to 40 years away. And today, in many testimonies here, you'd hear 10 years. We think it's sooner. It's going to be a bit of a hockey stick transition, and we don't want this to be a tsunami that overwhelms everybody. It's absolutely within our power to make these changes now. You don't need quantum talent to start to layer in and look at your infrastructure on all of the different gaps. The problem is with so much of our computational infrastructure using software as a service, it's almost difficult to figure out where all the leakage points with RSA are. It's a huge undertaking, and it will be much more convenient if we start now and we learn best practices before these capabilities come online and surprise us. Because once scale is unlocked, it will come very quickly.
Great, thank you. And I know that you had touched on the immigration process that we have here and the huge backlog and a number of the inefficiencies that we have. But just to tag on to that, when it comes to ensuring that we have workers in training to be big players in this quantum computing space, do you think our post-secondary institutions are ready for this, or do they need improvement, or do they have the right capabilities in order to be able to be training and retaining people here in Canada?
Thank you again for the question. And I'm happy to yield the floor. I'm sure there are other opinions around the table from this, but universities have a fairly good time at getting students in. The challenge is getting permanent residency to said students that wish to stay. That is difficult. And the melange of immigration policies to bring people in a professional setting, which is where we're going to make or break this technology, right? Students offer training, but it's going to be the professional class that actually makes this thing live as a true ecosystem. Bringing those people in, we have to move faster. We can't have, 20-week terms, and we can't make permanent residency so difficult for them. We lose them that way. They want to stay here, but we just have to make it possible.
Thank you, MP Gray. That's about all the time we have. We'll now move to Mr. Dong for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And the Chair, I want to thank you for giving Ms. Simmons the extra 2 minutes so we get to hear specific suggestions. That was very, very helpful. I'm going to start my questions with Mr. Fersman. You talked about, I really like your half fence analogy. So if we're maybe not fully ready for mass commercialization, what advice do you have for the government and for legislators to strategically position Canada as a future, competitor in quantum science? And I'm speaking to whether it's the education infrastructure, whether it's the energy infrastructure, whether it's the broadband infrastructure. Is there anything that we must do now to secure that position? And I apologize in advance. I'll cut you off at 3-minute mark, so you got about 2 minutes to answer this.
Sure. The quick answer is yes. I think that although qubit count is not the only thing that we should be thinking about, if you don't have enough qubits, it's like not having enough pickets in your fence. You either can or you can't solve the problem that you're looking to solve. And so there are many things that are scaling up on the technology side. We're currently, as I think you've heard earlier, in sort of the 100 qubit regime, and we're looking to get towards sort of the millions of qubit regimes going forward. And so that will take some time still. I think there's lots of time for us to be thinking about everything from our training programs to be building up the domestic production of talent and attracting foreign talent for our universities at the graduate level. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity to be taking the fledgling efforts that are happening in Canada and making sure that there is the maximum amount of interaction between universities and these companies that are really the only places in Canada that you can get practical hands-on experience with the types of devices that are being built outside of university labs. Being able to bridge that together and working closely, I particularly am fond of the MyTax organization in order to do that. But I think that these are very important pieces of what we are looking to do.
I'm a fan of MyTax as well. I don't have much time.
Sure.
What's your thoughts on strategic planning for manufacturing capacity as well as broadband and energy infrastructure? How does that come into play in the quantum world?
I think that those items are not directly relevant to the current process within quantum computing. But I do think that there's the possibility that advanced computing will impact all of those areas that you've discussed. It's just important to recognize that at the moment, there is nothing that we can do better, faster, cheaper with today's quantum computers over what's possible classically, but we expect that to change within some of these narrow areas that we're focusing on.
Very
and I
good.
think it's important to recognize whether or not these specific areas that you're looking at are actually directly connected to the development within quantum computing.
Thank you. I would like to direct my next questions to Ms. Simmons. The 6 points that you brought forward, I'm going to start with the reaping rewards. What can you expand that a little bit? How can Canada for our future generation to benefit from today's research? Is this through IP protection, or what can legislators do to make sure that we get a piece of pie?
Thank you so much. So yeah, I think procurement contracts are a big one, but within the government, you need to have a talented due diligence team. There is no single point of quantum due diligence within the government right now. So there's no even point of having procurement discussions because there's no way for the government to navigate this. I think we should be procuring infrastructure on quantum networks so we can secure coast-to-coast communications. And I think we should be buying some of the computers so that these students can train on them. So in terms of IP, I can mention them again, but I do think that there's things that could be done from a policy perspective to insist that research contracts disclose all those funding mechanisms. There's a lot of international money buying IP in Canada right now, and it's not being openly discussed. And we need to help firms with the post-quantum encryption transition.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does actually. Thank you. And on the salary front, you talk about, the standard salary perhaps 5 times or times more than what they're getting here in Canada. But the Canadian social environment and all these, the Medicare and all these social benefits, they do come into play to attract talent and retain them, right?
Right. So I have no problem paying 5 times the Canadian national salary average for my quantum researchers. No problem whatsoever. But we need the procurement contracts so that we can go and raise the private, companies in this space are raising more money on single rounds than the entire national quantum strategy. Right. So for
as they should, because the
right, and that's how private
investment
works. Exactly. But
That's
private investment is only unlocked with contracts. Really.
Right.
And so it's getting those contracts here. We're at a stage where it's very much like Kitty Hawk. I would say quantum computers compared to classical computers are like flight compared to cars.
Right.
They unlock completely different things. And the first time you have a flight taking off, it lasts maybe a couple 100 meters and then lands. But without investment in industry to actually bring that to scale, you don't unlock satellites and large scale.
That's very helpful.
There's so much.
I got one more question I want to get in. You talk
Yes,
about the talent retention, immigration time frame. And I would just want to put that in perspective. And then you talk about security issues. All to do the due diligence on immigration, it takes time, right? And talent retention, we got to show the open door and whatnot. But it may not work in the same conversation as if we're talking about security issues. And
yes, sir.
And what do you see the balance? Like, how do we balance these to make sure that we can attract and retain talent?
It's a tough question. I'll need a brief answer, Madam Simmons. We're
absolutely. CSE and CSIS to screen applicants, partner with Canadian industry, quantum industry, and help them screen applicants. And once they're approved by CSE, fast track them, get them in under 6 weeks.
Sweet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move to Monsieur Lemire pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Lemire for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Blanchet-Jonca is going to be there replacing Mr. Lemire today. It's a pleasure. Hello to my colleagues and witnesses, and thank you for all being here today. My first questions will be for Mr. McCauley. I share your pride, Mr. McCauley. You mentioned that the University of Calgary is recognized for research, and there's also University of Quebec in Rimouski, which is also won awards in Canada for its research and for its size. Mr. McCauley, I would like us to demystify the whole issue of research science in Canada. I'm looking at the brief that the university network of major Canadian universities submitted, including University of Calgary. I'm trying to look at the current picture of research and development investments in Canada via research chairs and universities. We note that Canada is lagging behind. Now, to call a spade, we're the only G7 country in the last 20 years which has reduced its R&D investments. It's also the only country which has lost ground in the last 6 years in terms of the number of researchers in Canada. And it's the country that lost a lot in terms of the World Innovation Index. Between 2001 and 2019, we went from 8th to 17th in rankings. So, of course, the lack of funding, it means that there's less fertile ground so that brains can actually be put to work and use their talents and develop innovations and also see progress. So I'd like to know from your point of view in your University of Calgary position, how do you see all of this?
question. I should identify, I'm on the board of Universities Canada, as well as a former board member of MITAC, so I really support that, and also was part of the submission from the U15. Our submissions from both Universities Canada and U15 actually are synonymous with many of the points that Dr. Simmons made and also Dr. Broadbent made about the particular quantum area. We are a nation that needs to be able to support not only the talent development, but also to be able to attract talent from outside the country, to nurture that talent. And an additional piece is not to lose that talent. My university has lost some amazing investigators to Europe and to the US in the quantum area in particular, which we would really like to retain here. So Canada has, I think, a very, very robust ecosystem for investing in people. And I would encourage the federal government to ramp up that investment, because talent really is our future, whether it be in quantum or whether it be in other areas. It really is about talent. We have tremendous programs in the country to support undergraduate students. We also, I think, need a bigger investment in graduate students who are going to come here from around the world, work with us, and hopefully, as Dr. Simmons said, stay and provide contributions to the Canadian economy and the future growth. So it is about talent, making it easy for people to come, make it easy for people to stay, and making it easy to nurture the people that we have. So that, in essence, is supporting the Universities Canada as well as the U15 documentation on the submission for this budget.
Merci, Monsieur McCauley. Je comprends que vous me parlez de...
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. You were talking about talent, but I was talking about facts that I'm seeing here in Quebec. Over 25% of people with doctorates, in other words, 1 out of every 4, cannot access funding, not because they're not competent, not because they're not skilled or lack projects, but rather because they can't get the funding. And Canada right now stands at 1.57 in terms of its GDP proportion devoted to investments, whereas in the States it's 2.9%. So we're at the back of the pack if you compare us internationally. I'm trying to see, yes, okay, we have robust programs that you've quoted, but we've got a garden, but we don't have any water to water anything in it, so none of the talent can grow. What do you think of that, Mr. Wesley?
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I mean, the Tri-Councils have requested additional funding to support growth across the country in a variety of areas. There is no doubt that the competition is severe, whether you're talking about NSERC, CIHR, or SSHRC, for example, across the entire country. So yes, an investment, I think, would be very, very much appreciated, once again, to grow talent across the country, because that's producing the ideas that we're going to help build our very, very productive future and support our aspirations of the various industries across the country. So an investment in talent, an investment in funding for research, I think, will be the benefit of all Canadians.
Merci, M. McCauley. Et je me permets encore de renchérir sur le...
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. And if I may add to what the U15 memo said, I think you're in a good position to refer to it because of your position at University of Calgary, which is a highly research-focused university. There's the FSR, the Research Support Foundation, but it means that universities who are highly research focused are very much affected. For the U15 group, we're talking about 20% with a floor of 20%, and the equivalent rate for U.S. universities is 52%. So am I to understand that funding is not there, but is there anything else? Are there any other gaps? What are your expectations from the federal government to be able to put Canada back into a leadership position and ideally help universities of all sizes so as to truly conduct research in their areas of expertise?
Thank you, and I appreciate the comment. I was a professor at University of California, so I know the relative difference in investments between Canada and the U.S. Canada is desperately, I think, in need of increasing investment in research support for universities, whether that be to support the direct costs of research from the federal government. It's the rates that you referred to are actually quite accurate. Those what are referred to as indirect costs are very, very important for universities across the country, as part of the Universities Canada or the U15, to actually support the aspects of research security. We talked about cybersecurity, which is very, very important, protecting our information and participating in those discussions. And the research security that could be funded by the federal government in those areas would be very, very much appreciated, enable Canada to keep up on the international stage.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. We'll move now to MP Brian Maas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses that are here. I'm just wondering if any of our private sector, or maybe some of the public sector too, I mean, it could be, if anyone's taking advantage of the science, research, and development tax credits. Is there anyone out there that's actually taking advantage of them, and what's your experience so far? So I don't know if Mr. Fersman or anybody else has done that. This is used in a lot of different sectors, but I'm not sure if quantum computing is actually accessing it right now. So I'll turn it open, and please just jump in.
Thank you. Yes, I think you're referring to the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Credits, commonly known as SR&ED.
Yep, SR&ED, yep.
And I would say that's been critically helpful, especially at the very early stages of setting up OneQubit. We're almost a decade-old company now, and being able to recoup some of the money that we have invested in this experimental research that we do has been very helpful. It's one of the easiest programs to access, and it's open to basically anybody in this field in Canada. I think it's a very good program.
Have you been able to make application yourself, or are you using a third party to do so? This committee spent a lot of time in the past, and I maybe pass this on to the researcher or the analyst, to look at what we've done as recommendations before, because it was always very difficult. There was almost a cottage industry set up to help people get through the application process, where they lose some of that money to pay for people to do applications. So I'm just wondering, it's good to hear, and it's been a real focus for a long time here. I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions and how to get it more accessible.
This will probably not make me any friends, but my suggestion would be not to use any of these advisors and to do the work yourself. It's not that challenging if you get a handle on it. And I think most organizations probably have the processes already in place that track the work of their employees in order to make this a fairly straightforward process if you've been through it once or twice. It's also easiest to start at the beginning, doing it yourself, and grow along. But anyone with a finance organization within their company should be capable of doing this without having to pay significant sums to third parties.
Excellent. Is there anyone else who would care to jump in on this subject matter?
Yes, I would like to. SR&ED is fantastically helpful, and I echo everything that's been said, and it's easy enough to do. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely a giant competitive advantage. I can't say the same from the bureaucratic red tape around the SCTC program or the SIF program or any of those other kinds of organizations, but for SR&ED, phenomenal.
Do you have any suggestions on the other ones, or do you want to submit in later if there's a couple things? This is because SR&ED is like, this is really positive. This is about the first time I've heard this type of an experience, because I'm sure the analysts will come back. It goes back to our original manufacturing study ages ago. So this is really encouraging, to be quite frank. Do you have any suggestions on the other systems? Because that would be really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to extend all of these conversations privately. Generally, the SCTC process is too slow. The SIF process is too slow. It's opaque, and it's not quantum specific in any way. So it doesn't tackle the fact that this is a high, very quickly moving industry. And what you propose as a project, which would be approved 18 months later, may no longer be relevant by the time it's actually approved, right? So we have to start mobilizing.
Excellent. Can I now switch over quickly to Ms. Broadbent? You mentioned something very unique that we haven't heard in this committee discussion so far. It's about the diversity with regards to the field. Can you really elaborate a little bit more emphasis on that? I think that's really critical. This committee and under industry, we are responsible for corporate board governance models with regards to diversity and equity. That's part of the mandate of Under Industry Canada. And I'm just wondering if you have some more thoughts about that, because there has been an attempt on the corporate side to have, we went with Canada Comply and Explain for equity and representation on boards. Other countries have done different things. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how to improve that aspect for Canada, because we are a little bit behind other countries for that representation.
Thank you very much for sharing these concerns and expressing the efforts that are being undertaken right now. So I mentioned camaraderie, and the reason I mentioned that is that we implicitly recognize, I think, common experiences and challenges. I think it's fair to say that, and I have anecdotal evidence, that women face a much higher barrier to success in the field. I mentioned that EDI is recognized as a catalyst for innovation, but the contrapositive of this is that threats to EDI are limitations to innovation. And if you make that equation in your mind, you really see the advantage that you can gain by having EDI enhancing initiatives. So I believe that these threats should be formally treated as threats, just as any other ones. Ways to mitigate this risk include incentivizing equity enhancing measures and career building measures.
Is there anyone out? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I don't mean to cut you off. Please go ahead.
Okay, so if I have a few more minutes or another minute, another question I would like to treat as harassment. So, for instance, some things that have been done is in 2017, the American Geophysical Union revised its ethics policy to treat harassment, discrimination, and bullying as scientific misconduct, just as any other type of misconduct, such as fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. I also mentioned a support system for childcare. So the years of early parenthood, they often coincide with this critical career building years for highly qualified personnel, and women are particularly affected. And please note these early years of education are characterized by very precarious employment situations. So we're talking about 1 or 2 year postdoc contracts, and that's very difficult to balance with the thoughts of building a family.
Those are excellent points. I was going to raise your notation of childcare as well, too. Mr. Chair, do we have any more time or next round?
There would be too brief an answer, Mr. Massé. So we'll come back to you in any event in a subsequent round. So we'll move to Michael Cram for 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I believe most or all of my questions will be for Dr. Simmons. Doctor, earlier this week, the committee heard testimony that once quantum computing becomes widespread, all of the encryption algorithms used by the Canadian banking sector will be obsolete. Do you agree with this analysis?
I would go further. You only need one quantum computer that is capable of breaking this for all of those things to be obsolete. You don't need them to be widespread. It's very asymmetric. We need to defend everything, but only one from an adversarial country would absolutely eradicate trust in all online communications of all forms. Yes, banking, but everything else. It's very important that we consider this.
Okay, but specific to the banking sector, so if this country's banks don't take any protective measures and one bad actor develops quantum computing, what would it be like when Canadians go to the banks to withdraw cash? What would that look like?
It wouldn't work. I don't think it would be recognized right away. I think there would be major theft and we wouldn't recognize it. And then there would be an erosion of trust and it would be a very difficult situation. I would say we have to start layering in provably secure communications, one-time pad or QKD for these kinds of critical things. The SWIFT infrastructure, for example, SWIFT payments, interbank lending overnight, like all of these things need to be considered because they also use a lot of third-party software that may themselves have RSA leaks. So it's a major undertaking, and I am aware that the banks are aware, and I am aware that our security services are aware. But I think the undertaking is bigger than we've been describing. I think it's going to be a substantial undertaking because of how integrated the software world is, and because there's so many layers of obsolete legacy software that is going to be difficult to go back and figure out how to patch. This is the ultimate zero-day problem because there's no known patch that's provably secure at the moment.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understood that last point. So if these bad actors develop quantum computing and you have your life savings in a Canadian bank, would you keep it there?
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how the banks are going to respond, what their risk mitigation strategy is. Maybe they would shut down all access. But it's a difficult situation to imagine. This is one of the reasons why I didn't spend my 5 minutes talking about how great my company is. I spent the time warning people, we need to get ready.
Okay, so I wonder if you could elaborate then on how difficult would it be for the banking sector to secure our financial system? I'm gathering there would be more than one programmer changing a few lines of code.
Yes, sir. It's going to be a substantial undertaking. It's going to be a very substantial undertaking, and I think it's going to take years.
And obviously Canadians have to have confidence in the banking sector if they're depositing their life savings there. What laws or regulations do you think the federal government should implement to make sure Canadians have confidence in the banking sector?
As I said, I'm happy to take these conversations offline privately, but there are many things, and it doesn't need quantum specific expertise, which I bring to the table, to answer those kinds of questions. I think it's fairly easy to imagine ways to ensure compliance in short order on certain items. I think one of the precursor elements is going to be the NIST standardization process along post-quantum cryptography, because many large organizations are loath to make next steps until there exists some standard to adopt. My recommendation is to say to adopt all of those standards, layer them on, and so that they have to be all hacked to get through, and put in these additional layers of protection that are provably secure, because none of those post-quantum algorithms actually are proven to work. As I said, there's been 3 that have put forward that have been suggested as ultimately resilient against quantum attack, and 3 of them have fallen. Not all of them, but we haven't yet subjected any of these post-quantum algorithms to attack like RSA has seen over decades of work, and that's quantum attack or classical attack. So my suggestion is for critical infrastructure such as interbank lending to start with, but also, yes, things with to do with even consumer banking. Imagine some solution using one-time pad distribution or ultimately QKD for renewal of said keys.
And Dr. Simmons, I only have about another 10 seconds. I don't think that's enough time to get through all of your recommendations, but if you could make a written submission specific to banking policy, I would find that very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Cram. We'll move to Mr. Fillmore for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair, and tremendous thanks to the witnesses today for helping to illustrate the magnitude of the challenge that lies ahead, and as well the magnitude of the opportunity. And listening to each of you, it strikes me that when we think of this kind of Manhattan Project scale effort that's required, there are probably, and you'll correct me if I'm missing anything, but probably 3 components in that. And one is talent, and one is dollars, and one is policy. And these are the things that have come up today and in our previous meeting as well. And so I wanted just to, in the time that I have, just touch briefly with our academic witnesses today on the talent piece, with Dr. Simmons on the dollar piece, and with Angela from D-Wave on Allison rather from D-Wave on the policy piece, given that you're the government relations expert on the panel today. So to Dr. Broadbent and Dr. McCauley, graduates, are the graduates that your universities and Canadian institutions in general, are they leaving school with the requirements that the industry is looking for right now for quantum, to build a quantum talent base in Canada?
Maybe I'll begin. Or Dr. Broadbent, do you want to begin and I'll follow up?
Go ahead.
So I think all the universities in the country, and I mentioned all of our universities many of our universities have very, very strong quantum science programs, and they're collaborating extensively. So my joke about entanglement really, really is there. I think we need to do an extra special effort, as Dr. Simmons mentioned, but also mentioned from D-Wave, about how we can actually increase the talent pool. Our undergraduates are very interested in this area, but I think we need stronger graduate programs in particular. I also think we need to have graduate programs that perhaps integrate some of the combinations of skills in terms of AI, machine learning, as well as quantum pieces as well, to combine the expertise that we have. So we're developing them, and all of our universities are putting them forward.
Okay, Dr. Broadbent?
Yeah, so I would like to add that at the undergraduate level in mathematics, we're developing transferable skills. So we could really invest into more of that, of people creating people with inquisitive minds and logical thinkers. I see a huge need and interest in more quantum as well as cryptography studies, and it would be really great to bolster the offer that we have in terms of master's programs, as well as internships and opportunities that will link students with their future careers.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Simmons, I think you most starkly illustrated the scale of the challenge ahead. Just like in terms of the kind of financial investment that government or that the private sector needs to make in solving this. Can you frame that up for us at all?
Yes, and if you'll forgive me, I'll also speak as with my professor hat on and say that actually, yes, we are training phenomenal talent. The challenge is that they're all going elsewhere. We are training phenomenal talent, and I'm very successful at Photonic because we can recruit them back, but that's unusual. To your point about funding. We've heard on many panels before this that a very successful model is a DARPA-like model. Having an objective where it could be bid on and met by any one of a number of corporate organizations, in addition to research organizations, would be a phenomenal way to model this, in addition to procurement contracts, because you can have a contract according to an objective rather than an actual physical deliverable. Both would be fantastic models, but that's not the same thing as a grant. One of the examples, a satellite repeater, right? I wanted to discuss the opportunity to build out the quantum internet across Canada, which has a unique satellite-based deployment that is not being focused upon in Europe in the same degree. We have an opportunity to have a giant competition for bids and have some companies with ratchet clauses. If they're not meeting their milestones, they don't get it. But the scale of the funding needs to be at the $50 to $100 million per project level for it to be competitive with what is being on offer by the UK and the US and Europe.
Okay, thanks for that. And Mr. Chair, I hope there's a minute left. So Alison, on the policy side, so for me, the policy stuff, we'll probably have to speak to this idea of a single front door, a concierge, perhaps, kind of approach for the government of Canada to rationalize our work on this. Maybe it's our commitment to create CARPA, our version of DARPA. Do you have any thoughts on what government needs to be doing, funding aside, but policy-wise, what we can be doing?
Sure. I think policy-wise, leaning into public-private partnerships and looking at existing organizations that already have relationships with the industry, academia, and government is going to be key. And then utilizing those already existing, P3s in order to focus on what are those grand challenges? What are the public sector needs? How do we optimize vaccine distribution? Or how do we tackle some of the issues that we have in sustainability? How do we train up the folks about the different about the different systems that are out there? So from a policy perspective, I think that you look in and lean into public-private partnerships, and that's a way to scale up quickly.
Okay, thanks for that. I hope in future answers today we get to hear a little bit more about people's thoughts on CARPA, the Canada Advanced Research Project Agency. Thanks so much for all of your input.
Merci, Monsieur Fillmore, Madame Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore and Ms. Schwartz. And now over to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca for 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I have questions for Dr. Broadbent. You talked about added value when it comes to various equity, diversity, inclusion criteria. So these criteria are individual, but what about organizationally? These did not exist in the federal ecosystem or in terms of funding for research grants? So from my point of view, I observe that University of Ottawa is in a preferred position versus smaller regional universities, so smaller or mid-sized regional universities in terms of the critical mass of universities that are smaller and programs that are too big to be able to allow smaller universities and mid-sized universities to be able to apply. I'd like to know what you think about that. In other words, what about the organizational point of view, which is not taken into consideration, so that leads to some sort of territorial inequity? Yes, thank you very much. And I agree in terms of the inequity. I mean, we are a bilingual university and we use both languages. So language is an issue. We're often penalized because we have to invest additionally in the fact that we offer bilingual services. I apply for grants regularly to the National Research Council. I've seen that the federal government, I want federal government to apply GBA Plus. But I think you're talking about a different equity system related to the size of universities. Am I mistaken? Yes, that's right. I have noticed that the federal government doesn't seem to consider the small or mid-sized universities. So that leads to a negative bias. And this favors the bigger university because universities have already received research funding are given preferential status in that the funding considers their previous work, and so that helps them get subsequent funding. I'd like to see with you how we could include and make it fairer for universities that are smaller and medium-sized. Well, in terms of selection committee for grants, we consider the excellence of the individual and not from the research center. We're looking at the opportunities offers. And I think that's something that we should be doing at NSERC. We should look at what the opportunities are for those researchers and how are they optimizing their opportunities. How did they individually maximize their opportunities? Thank you, Ms. Broadbent. Another question. Thank you, Mr. Blanchet-Joncan. I'm very sorry that you used up your time. We will come back to you at the next round. And now over to Mr. Mas for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank our analyst already provided me with the response to the SR&ED tax credits and what we had called for, and really appreciate it. Actually, some of it is, I'll make sure we get it around to the rest of the committee members. I want to thank him for that because there's some more we can probably do with regards to some of the things are checked off at any rate, but I wanted to acknowledge that. But I want to move really quickly to Mr. McCauley. With regards to keeping and retaining students, I raised this the last meeting, it's been raised this meeting. I'm also wondering whether we're doing enough, and I'm not seeing it in my neck of the woods, in terms of University of Windsor and dealing with international students and graduate students, also having them to have access to their family members to join them over here in Canada. Some of their hours aren't counted for with regards to their immigration system, which is really weak in terms of a response, I think, from our country. And then on top of that, having reuniting family members to stay in the country is something that is a problem. Any thoughts about how we can improve that to retain talent? Because I think if you retain the family here, you got a much longer chance of having them stay for longer.
Yes, thank you. And I think Canada needs to look at all of these different options that you talked about in terms of policy. And I know that Dr. Simmons raised some as well. I know that when we're recruiting here to the University of Calgary, whether it be for graduate student position or a faculty member, we actually consider the family because we're actually recruiting a family unit. And if we want to retain those individuals, having the appropriate policies in place to support them as they transition here to Canada, and then try to figure out how we can make sure that we can retain them at all as possible. I think the other issue that we probably need to look at in Canada is how we include work integrated learning opportunities for our undergraduates and graduate students as part of the labor issues around retention in Canada. So I think there's a variety of areas that IRCC can be looking at, and I know they're very, very active in this area because, as you said, the retention of talent is just so important, and it is about families and their contributions to the local communities as well as to Canada.
Yeah, and there's restrictions on how many hours they can work, and as well volunteerism and a series of things. Would you include those types of elements as well? And I'm just going from the experience that I've seen, and I just think that the stronger we create the binds within the community, the more opportunity we'll have to keep them there. And then we also get local champions that want to keep them there. And they're not stealing jobs. There's such a lack of support that, or anyway, I'll let you talk.
No, those are the policies that I was referring to in terms of what we could be doing, including in those areas that you mentioned are exactly the ones that we've been discussing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Merci, Mr. McCauley.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Over to Mr. Deltel for 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. And I also would like to congratulate you on the painting you have behind you. It's quite intriguing, but it's very nice. I'd like to thank all the panelists this morning, actually this afternoon. It's all been very impressive.
You said earlier that instead of, and I will quote you in memory, you said instead of speaking how great my company is, well, my comment on that, I don't know how good is your company, but I know how great your testimony is today. Very impressive, and I just want to continue on questioning by Mr. Cram. Well, sometimes it's great, but sometimes also it's a little bit alarming. Ce que vous avez dit, Dr. Simons, peut un peu nous...
Dr. Simons, what you said, well, I'm not saying it's going to make us afraid, but it really calls into question the whole concept of security involving quantum. So I'd like to know from you, we had a witness a few days ago who came to us and said the battle is going to be with the first one to reach the goal, either US or Canada. If that's the case, it's not so bad. But do you think, or do you know, whether there are any other foreign powers who are in active competition right now who could go there before we get there?
Yes, thank you very much. Once the dominant design emerges, it's only a matter of time. So I would say that it's the kind of situation where, yes, if we get there first, that's great. We're not going to be the ones to use it adversarially, but the information will be out there, and it is just of essential importance from a national security perspective for so many countries, especially in a difficult world, to have that technology on hand. So I think that it's only a matter of time. And one of the things that did draw me to the nuclear bomb analogy is that once the information's out there, you can't put it back. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. So yeah, I don't think it's just a question of Canada versus US. I think the corporate espionage is such a major issue, and we are kind of on a clock. And there's just a lot of work to be done because it's so asymmetric, right? The workload is just going to be a very asymmetric one. So we should get started immediately.
So let me go with a clear, direct, and very incisive question. Where are the Russians and where are the Chinese?
The Chinese, I think, will, if they're not the winners, they will follow along within 2 years. I think the Russians they have their own effort. They would be further behind, but they think they would work with organizations to get up to speed because, as I said, they have some critical infrastructure that the rest of the world relies upon. So it's going to be a logistics supply chain thing, which brings me back to one of my other recommendations. We have to be thinking about sovereignty here, because there will be a lot of geopolitical tensions once the dominant design emerges, and I don't think it's very far away.
Not very far away. Do you have a time frame for us?
Not that I'm willing to disclose in this format.
Feel comfortable with this answer. As a human being, I would say. So I will address another issue, talking about the government, taking about the Canadian team. You know, the government should take the lead of grabbing all the brains, all the Canadian brains that we have to that, pour être sûr et certain de ne pas recréer les problèmes qu'on a.
Just to be sure that we don't end up recreating all the problems we had with the brain drain, with the laboratories, etc. And I'll add to the 1949 jetliner issue. Do you think that it's up to the government to take leadership on this? And if so, how do you see this Canadian team?
Is that question directed at me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think this will become, do you need to have some kind of Manhattan-style project or something similar where it concentrates focus and collaboration on what looks like a dominant design through prize DARPA-like projects? People do mobilize. There's like kind of an array of programs that can be adopted because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to actually coordinate and work towards goals. So one very natural goal is a computer, yes, but another very natural goal is a repeater so that we can actually develop the quantum network infrastructure that Canada will uniquely need because of our geography. So there's a lot of ways to incentivize collaboration, but it has to come through procurement contracts. It's not going to be built in a university. Universities are absolutely fantastic for training people, but that's not where these large-scale systems are going to go. They should be collaborating with organizations on these large investment projects, $50 to $100 million. Like, let's do the moonshot. Let's own it. We absolutely have the talent for it. We just need the support.
I really like your historical comparison to Madam Dr. Simmons very well, because we have some ideas of what happened before and what we should do for the future. My last question will be, okay, Mr. Cram raised the issue of the banking system. Do we have to be concerned also with our defense system, our army system?
Yes, sir. RSA is everywhere. RSA is everywhere. So it's medical records. It's every classical communication that is still, like, the biggest risk is that actually people are storing communications right now for the near term where quantum computers will be able to go back and retroactively read them all. And if you layer on all of these other post-quantum algorithms, that will buy us time. But if it is the case that all of those do eventually fall to attack, then all of those will be read in the future as well. So it's really, it's foundational. And if we can get in front of it, this is the opportunity. I don't want to be the harbinger of something negative here. If we get in front of it, then quantum computers will come online and be seen as the fantastic contribution to human technological progress that it should be known for. We have an absolute opportunity to redefine how we think about chemistry entirely, right? How we do drug discovery, material discovery. Imagine we're actually finally able to simulate the brain and room temperature superconductors, and just there's going to be so much good that comes from this technology. But I don't want the public's first impression of quantum computers to be, oh my goodness, they broke the internet.
Thank you. We will now move to Mr. Gahir for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity, and thank you to the witnesses for making time. Dr. Simmons, your testimony is, I think, scaring all of us a little bit. But my question is regarding research contracts that you talked about, research contracts with public universities, where secrecy is contracted for and IP said could be taken. Could you expand on that a little bit? Why don't universities have more leverage here?
The business model for universities is undergoing a dramatic shift. And this speaks to some of the research funding that's happened recently. The Canadian research system is fantastic. The NSERC system and the tri-agencies are truly fantastic, but underfunded by about 10x. And correspondingly, there is an incentive for professors to go and seek external research contracts from a whole host of organizations, both domestic and international, at basically any cost. It's how they compete globally. And correspondingly, those can come with all kinds of terms, but it's typically IP terms. So we are going through a mass sale of our IP right now because research contracts usually come with this proviso. And the secrecy element was surprising to me when I found out about it, but it's pervasive. So if you go and take a look at the research funding across universities, there's gone over the last 10 years in particular, it's been this massive teeter-totter shift in how research is funded. And it's not across the board, like it's quite disproportionate to different sectors and different researchers. But I wanted it to bring to your attention because I think it's important.
And do you think universities in America, for example, or elsewhere are doing a better job than Canadian universities at sort of fighting this balance of power?
Well, they have different funding mechanisms, so they're not so desperate. So they have more funding, like by far, they have more research funding, so they're not so desperate. But at the same time, yes, I am aware that is how the IP tends to go. That's what these this tech translation offices, they use research contracts in this format as a mechanism of measuring success. More is better, right? So that's their incentives right now. They want more research contract funding, and it comes at basically they don't recognize the value of the IP that they have. And this is just the new funding model for R&D corporately. They don't do it in-house anymore. They do it through these research contracts, right? So instead of having internal R&D teams, they have that as well as all of these IP purchase arrangements with universities globally.
Great. My next question is for Dr. Macaulay. So you mentioned quantum information storage, security, and quantum computing as areas where Canada leads currently. I'm wondering where we are in relation to other countries, our competitors in these fields, and what are they doing better than us, and what should we replicate?
First of all, I'm not an expert in quantum computing, but I have been involved with several other presidents of universities in Canada, including UBC, Waterloo, and University of Sherbrooke, as well as Andrew, in terms of trying to bring forward to ICED the notion of a quantum Canada strategy. So I highlighted some areas where I know that we excel, and Dr. Simmons mentioned them as well as Dr. Broadbent. This notion of building the next secure quantum internet, I think, is something that we in Canada can and have taken a very, very, very strong role. And so I want to reinforce that as one. I believe in some of the recent analysis that we've looked at historically about over the last decade, and I think Andrew can comment on this as well. Historically about over the last decade, I think Canada was ranked about number 5 in terms of a variety of different areas of quantum. But as I mentioned in my opening comments, and other the people testimony today have mentioned, we're losing ground. The US, China, the EU is investing huge dollars in this area for all the reasons that I think have been come in front of this community. So we need increased funding in this area to support our existing position And if we're going to improve, we need, in essence, another multiplier, which is why I was advocating for the Quantum Canada strategy. I also think, as the other members have testified today, is that we need this to really clearly identify public-private partnerships and a pull, i.e. procurement and contracts that Dr. Simmons mentioned, and developing the Canadian equivalent of CARPA, or a challenge-based approach to supporting this as a mechanism, I think is a really, really strong vehicle way forward. So it's investing in talent. It's making sure that we can develop the product with industry that can be rapidly mobilized around the world.
Great, thank you. My final question is sort of open for the panel. Is this an area where we can sort of work in conjunction with other countries, or do you think our technologies and strategies in this area have to be developed locally and sort of kept local as well?
This is Allison Schwartz. I'll try and answer that since I do global government relations. So I think that, Canada has a leadership role in many aspects of quantum, but not in all. And so, yes, you do need to partner internationally. You need to partner with folks in the United Kingdom and in Europe. You need to partner with folks in the US. Australia is actually looking at application development for transportation systems. And so I do think that there is an international cooperation and international partnership that needs to be had amongst allied nations. And so I do think that this is an area in which to lean in. And a CARPA-style program, if you look at what DARPA is already doing right now, they have a quantum program on benchmarking. They're looking at how to build a quantum computer in a phased approach. I mentioned in my testimony the quantum sandbox with application development. That could also be within one of these style programs. So you're actually building the applications while also looking at how to make the systems better. But yes, to answer your question, it does need to be in an international fashion.
Merci, Madame Schwartz. Je passerai maintenant la parole à Monsieur Généreux pour...
Thank you, Madam Schwartz. Over to Mr. Généreux for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Dr. Simmons, thank you very much for your testimony. In your recommendations, you proposed the creation of a committee at the government level. And I'd like to hear what you have to say. I imagine that this committee should also be shared with industry, or people from industry, or at least people representing industry, because what I've understood from the beginning of this study is that the quantum cluster in Canada is fairly small. Everybody knows everybody, and they all seem to respect each other highly. So my first question is, should that committee, I think actually the answer is yes, but should it be supported by the private sector? And second of all, once this committee has been struck, should it be making recommendations? We know that NSERC is currently working in this area. We've had witnesses from the organization, and they've told us about the assistance they provide in quantum. So how should the committee begin its work, and at what point? I imagine the answer is as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, and I think the flavor of how that group of people is formed is very important, because if it is simply a part-time job staffed by people that have skin in the game, that is just going to be a squabbling over more funding for their own particular version of quantum, their own particular flavor. And I think the model that I would like to recommend are a team of people that are funded separately and independently and well, right? The salaries here are, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you need to have a team of people that the government can go to and say, is this bid or is this application warranted, or is it that they can be the ones to, for example, choose external experts to do some due diligence. It's a lack of due diligence. It's a lack of awareness and consulting capability within the government that means that we have no single point to go talk to. There's no team of people which exist. They exist in the US, they exist in the UK, they exist in Australia. I know all of them. Right? I know the ones in Germany, I know the ones in France, and there's none in Canada. So I can't even go and speak with a team of experts, of quantum experts that are paid by the government to be able to offer policy recommendations to the government, because it should not be necessarily me and my part-time, right? Or any of the other people around this table. Although we have our views, you do need to have a team of independent experts that can navigate the space, help navigate the space. And they're going to be expensive, and they're only going to be more expensive over time. But I think it's important that they have that independence and not currently wear another hat, because otherwise you have that natural bias that creeps in, and when people start to think territorially.
Madame Simmons, tantôt vous avez parlé.
Dr. Simmons, you were talking about salaries, sometimes 5 or 10 times the average wage in Canada to retain talent. In Quebec, in the tech world, especially with video games and video, which has become a bit of a specialty in the province, the government is giving a 40% tax credit, a refundable tax credit on salaries. Ubisoft and other companies have taken big advantage of this.
What's going on right now in the quantum industry? Or
are the provinces aware?
Oh, forgive me. Sorry. So what I would say is that SR&ED takes this role, and if anything, there should be a quantum edition. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely how we can help to compete. But the only way we can ever match those kinds of salaries is for these companies to be able to raise that kind of capital, and that capital can only be raised if we have contracts.
Je vais terminer là-dessus. J'ai l'impression.
So I'll close with this now. What I'm going to say is very positive. My impression is that you've just made a Will Smith out of yourself today, and you've woken up the government of Canada. So I feel I've just gotten a slap in the face today. And I think what you've just shared with us is absolutely extraordinary. The reality that you are confronting us with is really move your butt, because we're going to be far behind.
Move really quickly about it, and I hope this committee and the recommendation that we'll see, the first one will be this committee that you want us to create. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Généreux. I share your opinion. I think that this really has been a wake-up call that's useful and necessary. So thank you to all our witnesses. And I'd like to give the floor to Madame Vivienne Lapointe. Thank you, Chair.
My question is for Mrs. Schwartz. Your company says that you're the world's only commercial supplier of quantum computers. So with your experience in government policy, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how current government policy helps or hinders your business as a global supplier.
Thank you so much for the question. Governments are focusing on the research side of how to get the hardware systems bigger and better, because they want to be the first ones, as Steph has mentioned, they want to be the first ones to have a quantum computer inside their geography. But where governments are not going is actually procuring and utilizing the technologies that are available today and helping to advance it. In Australia, you're looking at it for transportation. The Army is looking at it for autonomous vehicle resupply. In Japan, they've looked at it for piloting for tsunami evacuation routes, optimization, as well as how to reduce CO2 emissions during waste collection. Canada does not have any focus on anything in the near term. And if you were to ask them if there are different quantum fundings that are out there and the focus out there, what could be utilized and see benefits within the next 1 to 5 years, it might end up being a big zero. And so governments really can lean in and look at what are they doing from the near term, the midterm, and the long term, the 1 to 5 years, 5 to 8 to 10 years, and 10 years and beyond. And that's where you're looking at the hybrid technologies that are out there, the HPC plus data centers. That's going to be critically important to navigate through. There's also no supply chain domestically within Canada. We use superconducting chip fabrication. There is no domestic commercial size superconducting chip fabrication plant in Canada. So we have to use one in the United States.
Okay. Thank you. And we have heard about supply chain issues from other witnesses. My next question is for Mr. Fersman. I'd like to hear, we've heard a lot about the talent pool. And so I'd like to ask for your thoughts on how we can attract and also develop the talent pool here in Canada.
Right. Well, I think we're doing a great job of attracting talent to Canada. I think actually most of the best graduates in this space from Canadian universities have probably not been through Canadian elementary schools. I'm noticing that a lot of people come over after their undergrads, go into our grad schools, and they end up being some of the top graduates. So attracting students is actually something that I think our universities are doing very well. But it might be worth noting, for example, a typical MyTax intern might come and work at OneCubit with a starting salary while they're part of their MyTax program at around, say, $45,000 and slightly higher. But these are sort of the levels that grad students might expect as they're going through school. Within about 2 years, we find that these people are receiving offers at the equivalent of 200,000 Canadian dollars and above to go and staff up many of the organizations around the world, in the United States, in Australia and Singapore and Japan. And we are understanding that we're creating incredible value within these students as they go through the very end of their development process. But again, we are also investing in those students and making them significantly more valuable. And so then retaining, it's a nice problem to have. You're creating an investment in students that are making them much more valuable, but because they're much more valuable, they're also therefore more expensive. And if you don't compensate them more, then they will be acquired by other organizations. And so I think the important thing is recognizing that because having an opportunity to work at one of these companies is still really the bottleneck for giving people industrial experience. Once you have someone with that experience, they become tremendously valuable, and keeping them in the country at that point is really a matter of matching the new global standard of salaries that we're seeing emerge.
Okay. I'm not sure how much time I have left, but I'd like to ask you a similar question that I asked Mrs. Schwartz, and that is in terms of government's role in developing policies. What do we need to keep doing? What do we need to stop doing? And what do we need to start doing?
I think the things that you can keep doing include investing in all of the things at the beginning of the talent pipeline. That seems like there is great work happening there and things that can be incrementally improved on that front. I think what might be something we can start doing is thinking about what is the nuts and bolts of Canada's national quantum strategy? What are we really trying to, how do we define success? What does success look like there? And then how do we make sure that we can be investing in the long term? Compared to my colleagues here, I think I'm slightly less optimistic about the very short timelines around quantum computing, even though I'm very aligned in terms of the impact. And so my concern is that we can't have spikes of funding that then disappear and expect to retain people through that process. So I would want to look at a 10-year program that had an understanding of how that scaling up of funding can grow with the organizations. And should we see an acceleration of this process, to be able to understand that we would need to accelerate that funding, but also to recognize that this is something that's likely to play out really over the next 100 years, even though it's just starting now and we can expect some tremendous development over the next decade.
Thank you very much. Je passerai maintenant la parole à Monsieur Blanchet.
Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. 2 quick questions. First, for Dr. Broadbent, I'd like to get back to what you were talking about earlier. You were saying that you're a bilingual university, English and French, at the University of Ottawa, and you have to deal with the Social Sciences Research Council. Are there any constraints that you have? Do you have to table your documents in both languages? I'd like to also hear what you have to say about the fact that right now it's impossible for some francophones to do research in their mother tongue or use one of the 2 official languages in Canada. What's your opinion? Thank you for the question. I was alluding to the fact that we need to double resources in terms of teaching in both languages and offering services to the entire population of students that we have. In terms of grant applications, I do not consider that we are required to submit in both languages. We can submit in the language of our choice. And Dr. Broadbent, what about people who can't use one of the 2 official languages to study in certain sciences in Canada? What's your opinion? I don't have specific data for that, but I would invite them to come to University of Ottawa so they have the choice. With great pleasure. but I don't believe that certain research chairs are offered in French, but I would be happy to visit you and share some information. Now a question for Ms. Schwartz. You talked about some applications, including things that can be aligned regarding technology and quantum technology more specifically. What about energy, the energy transition? We know that in Quebec we have various studies and minerals studies. Is there a way to connect the work to be able to meet the needs for energy transition and fight climate change?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Yes. There is a lot of work that's being done in the energy field. E.ON, which is a German company, is actually looking at distribution of energy and how to actually, as you're driving an electric vehicle, put energy back onto the grid. As I had mentioned in Japan, they were looking at AI and quantum applications that they were piloting, looking at waste collection and reducing CO2 emissions by 60%. In the United States, there was just a workshop in the Office of Electricity that D-Wave participated in, actually looking at a variety of areas in which we could utilize quantum computing and quantum hybrid applications for energy. So the short answer to your question is yes, there's a lot of places to look, and we need to get the smart minds together to identify those. And that's where a quantum sandbox could throw those questions out and start to develop answers coming in.
Merci beaucoup. Je passerai maintenant la parole à Monsieur Mas.
Thank you very much. And now I turn the floor over to Mr. Mas, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll continue with Madam Schwartz. With regards to our global competition and other international groups, is there like a strong quantum computing in the private sector coalition, like almost like a lobby group in the United States or in Europe? Kind of what's the lay of the land for those elements? In many industries, there's associations and so forth, and I'm not familiar with the quantum computing ones. I'm more familiar with auto and other heavy industry, but not those aspects. Are those happening, and then are they effectively lobbying in Washington, say, for example, and that?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Yes, there is the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, it's QEDC, which was actually created by congressional law. And it has both industry, academia, the national labs, government, and it's actually starting to open up its membership to other countries as well, and Canada is one of them. You also have the Quantum Industry Coalition in the United States, which is a factor of quantum industry. Similar, we have the Quantum Industry Council in Canada, which Steph and I are both members of. There's also stuff in Japan, QSTAR, and there's also other consortium and other think tanks that are looking at this in Europe and in the UK as well. So we are very coordinated in our efforts, and a lot of the focus is exactly what's been discussed today. How do governments prepare? How do we actually utilize the technology today? How do we look at supply chain? How do we identify talent? What are the best ways in which to navigate?
And real quickly on that, are you part of like the Canadian Business Council in the United States? I'm vice chair of the Canada-U.S. Parliamentary Association, and so we lobby quite a bit there, and there's a lot of business, that have joined from the Canadian perspective, but I haven't run into any quantum at the time yet. So I'm just wondering whether, is this kind of just emerging, or are there things that we can do as members of Parliament and also our trade councils to further get your voices and supports across the country and across, more importantly, internationally? What can we do to help?
I appreciate that. Yes, we are not members yet of the Canadian Business Council. However, it is on my list of things to look at. We have been focusing on quantum specific because a lot of the issues that these larger organizations tackle are above and beyond kind of where quantum needs to focus. But those are the areas, I think, in next year and in 2023 or the end of 2022 that a lot of these different quantum organizations are going to navigate into, especially with some use cases in the auto industry, which I'm happy to follow up on privately, of areas that auto manufacturers are looking at for PFAS as well as optimizing manufacturing floors.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Je passerai la parole à Madame Gray pour 5 minutes.
Thank you, and over to Madam Gray for 5 minutes.
Chair, my first, my first question is for Dr. Simons. We've heard some shocking testimony today of how behind Canada is on the security issues around quantum computing and the security issues that they can compose. And so my question is, what about quantum hacking of social media platforms and accessing people's personal information, messages, photos, and what about encrypted messaging apps? Are they all secure?
No. So RSA, the way encryption works right now is that there's an asymmetric layer and a symmetric layer. And that asymmetric layer is exactly everybody needs that asymmetric layer for the symmetric part to work. And so that's every communication. It's every single communication we have on the internet. It's also the SWIFT banking system. It's also how you send communications between government buildings, right? Like everything relies upon the fact that RSA is just really hard. It has shown to be the case that classical computers have not been able to get at it. And again, I don't want to be the one who I am trying to get attention to this issue because of the risk of failure being so high. I think it's entirely plausible that these post-quantum algorithms are successful. I would just be over the moon because then it removes us as seen as a cybersecurity threat. And then we get to be enjoyed, the technology gets to be enjoyed for all of these wonderful things. But we have to get them in, and it's going to take time. And if it doesn't work, if these aren't sufficient, then we're in a real bind. So that I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, and sorry to be the one to shock you all into being aware of this, but it is coming. And I think it's perhaps hard to imagine the scale of the shift that's going to need to happen in time for this to come on.
Great, thank you. So what needs to be done in order to protect these platforms and all of the information that's on there?
Yeah, so I don't think there's anything we can do to protect the communications that are being stored right now using RSA by adversarial nations. All of that information is going to be openable to adversarial governments if they've stored it, and I know they are. So there's really nothing we can do about that. But we can start to protect all the communications going forward by layering in RSA and all of these other layers of defense. And I think we should go so far, especially for critical infrastructure, access to power grids, access to nuclear facilities, for goodness sake, right? Like anything that has access using RSA, of course, has additional infrastructure, but it is a weak point. And the only thing that's provable to block that is going to be a one-time pad or a QKD solution. And fortunately, Canada is just a global leader on QKD. I can't tell you how fantastic it is to be in a country that is leading the world on this. Quantum satellites at IQC, I mean, and the invention thereof, which was mentioned before by Gilles Brassard, it's just, we have the talent to do it, but we need to mobilize because it's not sufficient for the researchers to just say it needs to happen. There's a lot of work to be done.
So just for clarification, do you mean that if these were hacked and this information did become available, did you say that also messages that were going back, like that were stored in history, or maybe other messages that right now are considered encrypted and are safe, that we think won't be seen, that those could all be accessible at some point? Is that what you're saying today?
That's right. That's right. And we know that they've been storing messages for decades because they know this has been possible since 1995. It's just a matter of time.
Wow. So in your best knowledge, are these platforms addressing this right now? Like, are they putting these different layerings in, or is it part of their plans based on what you know?
I know that people are thinking about it, but I know that there's almost zero sense of urgency. And I think that's a mistake.
So what do you think needs to be done right now? What steps could they be taking right now based on the technology that's available right now?
Yeah, thank you. So there is, I think a lot of large organizations are wary of adopting standards that haven't been stress tested. And so that NIST is coming through with a recommendation for post-quantum cryptography. That's going to be coming through. It's rumored to be in the next few weeks, perhaps months. I think that should be layered on top of RSA because it should be sufficient. You have to at least have a quantum computer to break RSA, but you should also layer in all of those for the most secure critical infrastructure, we should have a one-time pad solution. And a one-time pad solution means loading up a lot of preloaded keys, and actually physically distributing it between the locations that we want to secure communications between. And I know that very few organizations are thinking about this. QKD is the other one, but that's a bigger infrastructure play, and I think deserves investment because that's the future, absolutely. But it's going to take time, and we're not going to be able to deploy it quickly enough for before we need to secure our communications. And as I said, yeah, the communications that are happening today are being stored to be open tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simmons. I'll move now to Mr. Erskine Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Joel. I guess I want to pick up on what may be a difference between testimony, but may not be, and for some clarity on procurement, because my understanding from listening to Mr. Fersman is much of this technology is akin to a half fence and doesn't have current value, but will have future value. And then Ms. Simmons, you've identified this need to procure today. And how do I square those two ideas? Maybe start with Mr. Fersman and then move to Ms. Simmons.
Right. Well, I think you've understood me exactly correctly. And my belief is that the government needs to understand that quantum computers today are not a better, faster, cheaper solution to any known problem in terms of their ability to actually deliver that. And yet, we know that there are many areas where only quantum computers will likely be able to do this work in the future. And so I think the real question is, without forcing a half fence on industry, how do we make sure that we are procuring in ways that recognize the current state and going into this eyes open, saying we need this work to be able to happen over the next, say, decade. But we also need to recognize that if you're using a quantum computer to do a solution today, you're not using the best available solution. And so for studying how quantum computers work, this is very important. But in terms of saying everyone should switch to quantum computers today, that's a nonsense statement. It's impossible, and it's not something that's in line with the technology and the technological reality.
Thanks, Mr. Fersman. So Ms. Simmons, from the government's perspective, with the public dollars we could put in play on procurement, what is an example of something that you would like to see the government procure and that they are not procuring today in the quantum space?
Yeah, so the National Quantum Strategy just invested a third of the National Quantum Strategy into training, essentially. Why don't we have these quantum computers procured for that training purpose? Right? Why are we not buying the? Yes, of course, we are building fledgling airplanes, right? That yes, they don't cross the ocean yet, but we know where they're going. And if we can support local industry, we can build more and more of these things and actually pay the salaries to keep the professionals here. I completely agree with Andrew. These things do not move the commercial needle from a computational perspective yet, but we all know where these are going, and we tend to overestimate the short, but underestimate the long-term applications of these things. This is commercializing a branch of physics. It's going to transform everything. And if we give people hands-on training in these training organizations, then we don't need to rely so much upon industry for this detailed training. I would add one more thing. There are quantum technologies that are useful today. QKD is one of them. It is only short distance, but it's provably secure, and it's something that you can purchase. I think one of the things that the government could procure is a demonstration, right? You could procure the demonstration of a repeater. This is what DARPA does, right? They procure milestones on technological roadmaps. And that's one way. It's not a grant. It's actually, can you procure this deliverable? And it makes a big difference to the ability to raise the capital necessary to actually keep the talent here in Canadian organizations. They want to be here.
And you referenced commercialization. It seems to me that probably there is more to do with respect to training and retaining talent, but the government seems to have identified that as a core priority in the course of the dollars and cents so far. In relation to the consultation so far and what we heard report, I've asked this question of other witnesses, but I'd be interested in Ms. Schwartz's view to start with, and then Ms. Simmons and Mr. Fersman, if we've got time. But there's this open question of how do you best spend the public dollar? There are large organizations, you'd make small bets in large organizations, a small number of bets, or a large number of bets in smaller organizations as it relates to commercialization. And there's an open question in what we heard report as to the way the government ought to pursue. Do you have a view as to how the government should be spreading the rest of the money around in terms of commercialization in particular?
No, I appreciate the question. And I heard that question that you had raised in previous hearings as well. Many quantum computers, if not most of them, are available through the cloud. So you're able to access the system, build the talent, you're able to identify areas of utilization of the technology today in a quantum hybrid format, as I talked about. That is also an area of helping these smaller startups get their systems ready and available through a cloud. If there was a domestic high performance computing center that was integrated with quantum, you could have some quantum systems there at a variety of sizes that, maybe some of them are the smaller ones that are really looked at just for research, and other ones could be commercial sized. And navigate through that. And so you're able to, I don't think it's an and, or I don't think it's an or, I think it's an and from the government's perspective of actually looking at how do we navigate to get these different systems up to a level. But once they're already there, how do we push them for their technology readiness to push them into a mature market?
Thank you, Madam Schwartz, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Thanks to all of our witnesses. That's all the time we have. It was a very interesting discussion. I'm sure eye-opening for many listening and for colleagues here on the committee. I'll also take just a brief moment because I know last week MP Cram had questions on quantum as it pertains to crypto. And there's an interesting discussion that I quite enjoyed a few months back with Mr. Fersman on Preston Piss, the Investors podcast. So if you want to learn more on quantum as it pertains to encryption and the financial sector, that was a very interesting discussion. So thank you, Mr. Fersman. While we have you here, I wanted to thank you for that. And I wish all witnesses, all members, a great weekend. Thanks to the analysts, thanks to the interpreters, thanks to the clerk. And this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, Chair. Good job today. Good job this week.